Hello there everyone, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns and today I'm going to show you how to make these shooting stars ear cuffs, and these are mine that I've made here. So they're both the same, I just chose to make one in silver and then one in copper as well, just to show you the different looks you can get just from choosing a different wire, because this is all made with one length of wire, both of them, and you have that ear cuff part in the middle that hooks onto your ear and sits nicely, and it's going to be comfortable as well. So that's what they look like. So if you want to learn how to make them, then keep watching. So the only thing we're going to need is this 0.8mm regular round copper wire. So let's get a wire ready and let's get started. So then the length of wire that we'll need is 50 centimeters, and this is going to make the whole ear cuff. So to start, we then need to grab the length of wire here that we cut ready, and then I need to start in the middle of that, and we need to make the part that's going to grab onto the ear first of all. And for that I'm going to use this pair of 6-step bail making pliers, because we're going to need to make some curves, and I'm using the second largest one, but you can also use round nose pliers or any other kind of bail making pliers that you have. I'm going to then take this, place my wire roughly in the middle of the wire here into my pliers, and then I just need to take one end first of all and bring that around to get the first curve in place. And just on this side here, you can just make them cross over each other a little bit. Then what we need to do is also determine the length, because this is kind of what's going to grab onto your ear on one side. Let's make sure it's tight around. Then to determine the length, I'm just going to take my measuring tape here, and what I like to do is make the length from this side to what we're going to make on the other side about 1 inch. Now obviously it's not precise, it's going to be different from person to person, but roughly about 1 inch from that point there until when I then want to make the curve on the other side. So something like that. And then place my pliers onto that place and then bring that around, making sure obviously we get this kind of almost infinity effect. And I'm just going to bring that underneath the other one, just so one length is going on one side and one is going on the other side. It doesn't really matter. But then we end up with something a bit like this. So you can see this kind of infinity effect that we get. And it's these two curves that we're going to end up bending around and making rounded, that's going to grab onto the side of the ear, but I'm going to do that at the end. So we kind of have this midpoint in place now. Then what I'm going to do is use these tails, long ends of the wires, and then actually start making the stars. So while we're making the stars, what I like to do is kind of measure against my ear as I make them to make sure I get the right shape. So just to show you what I mean, I'm just going to get my ear out, and then the wire that I've got ready here, you can see the loops that we made. What's going to happen is they're going to sit right around this point on your ear, and then the one side here is going to kind of bend around the outside of the ear and latch onto towards the back, and then the other one is going to fold around, so it's going to grab onto the inside of your ear. Obviously it's still going to be comfortable, but that's how it's going to fasten. So what we then do is use one length of wire to then shape the stars as we go, following more or less the shape of your ear there on the top. And then down here, we're obviously going to follow the shape of the bottom part of your ear. So again, keep measuring against your ear when you make it. Just use a mirror or something like that. So then to make the stars, I'm going to switch to a pair of flat nose pliers here. And what I'm going to do is actually use the jaws on them to make the stars with. So I'm going to use them more or less as a measuring tool. Now these specific ones, the jaws on them are about 2mm wide. So from one side to the other one there. So fairly small for flat nose pliers. But I'm going to use them, like I said, to make the star and make it as symmetrical as possible. So if you've got some flat nose pliers but that are wider in the jaw, that's obviously going to make a larger star. And what I want is for the star to not be too large, because it is just an ear cuff that we're making. If you're interested in the specific pliers that I'm using, this is a Suron brand, and they're the flat nose pliers. I do really recommend these anyway, because I've had them for ages and I pretty much don't use anything else other than my Suron pliers. So these are the ones that I'm using. If you're interested, I'm going to put a link in the description box down below to where you can get them. Otherwise, you can also use, say, chain nose pliers, and you just have to kind of gauge it a bit more by eye. But what I'm going to do is take my pliers and then place my wire into them. I'm going to just work on one wire at a time once we start making the stars. First of all, I just want to kind of get them into position, because right now you can see they're crossing over and under each other like that. I want this one on the top to actually come out towards the top, so I'm going to place my pliers on that wire just before where it starts overlapping with the one that goes in the opposite direction here. Then I'm going to bring it back out, up and away from me, and just put a bit of a bend in there. A bit of a nice and as sharp a bend as you can. So just push the wire against the pliers. Something a bit like that. And I like to always then do that throughout as well. Whenever I make a bend, I go right on the other side of the bend and then squeeze that. And you can see it kind of just straightened out the wire a bit. And what it does, it just makes that point or the bend that you've just made sharper, which obviously will be handy for when making the stars. So that's the one side. I'm just going to do the other side as well. Again, grab onto the wire just before it starts overlapping. Bend the wire against the pliers. Just reposition on the other side of the bend to just make it a bit sharper. And there you can see we now have the two lengths of wire going in opposite directions, and it's then one of them here we're going to use to make the stars on the one side, and the other one we're going to do the same thing but on the other side. So I'm just going to start working with one of them. So then to start making the first star, what I do is I just choose which one I want to start with. I grab onto the wire, the length of wire there, right after that very first bend. Make sure to go right up until you can't get the pliers any further. Just at the point of the pliers. And then I take the tail here and bend the wire again against the pliers, but then back kind of in the opposite direction, or something like that. And then what we want between, on the bends between the points, we need an angle that's not quite 90 degrees, so a little bit larger than 90 degrees. But you can still adjust it as you go along the way as well. So just kind of do it roughly. Then again, like I said, go on the other side of that bend, and then just squeeze the wire so you get a sharper bend. You can already see that. And you can always adjust that there as well if you want to tighten up the angle a little bit. Something a bit like that. Then I grab onto the other side of that bend. As you can see, I'm constantly using my pliers there. I make sure it goes all the way up until it won't go any further on the straight length of wire here. So just on this side of the bend. Then I take the long end again, and now I'm making a point in a star, so that means I need to bend it back against itself. So just bend it against the pliers. Always reposition pliers, your hands, however you need to hold on to things. So bend against it there. You can see that's going to end up being a point. And especially with the points also, make sure you just go on the other side of the bend and just squeeze on the wire just to sharpen up that point a bit more. It does make quite a big difference in the final look. And then when you have the point at a decent size, so you don't want them too tight. So if I brought them closer together, that there would be too tight. You need a bit of a space between them, a bit of a gap, but obviously you don't want it too open either. Again, you can adjust it along the way as you make a few more and see how it looks symmetrical wise all the way around. Then I need to take this tail of the wire, bend against my pliers, going away from the piece. So again, basically constantly swapping direction. And so like that. And then what I need to do is when I bend from a point here, just show you, I put my pliers in on the second half, you could say, of that point. And what you need to do is make sure this wire then that we're bending is going to end up being straight with this part straight across from it. So we need to make sure that it's going to be more or less straight with that. And then what we need to do is, when that's in the same direction then as straight as possible, I'm going to go on the other side of that bend and then tighten it up again. And that's what we need to make sure to do throughout. Make sure that the points across from each other are straight, where the wires kind of run straight there. And then keep my pliers there. And then to make the next point, because this is already the first half of the next point, I need to take the tail, bend it against the pliers, again in the opposite direction as before. and then just push it against, and it doesn't matter whether this tail goes over or under this here in the middle, because we're going to keep bending it back and forth. Not until we kind of get to the top there, then we will have to determine where we want to bring the wire. So obviously now it's a second point, so try and get that about the same width as the first point, but just make sure to tighten up the angle as well. Something like that, you can see that really helps sharpening up the points. And then when you have that one in place, you tighten it up, you can always bring the wire closer. Now bring it back out. Again, push the wire against the pliers. Again, so this wire here now comes straight with the wire across from it just there. You can see it runs along my finger. And that's what we need to check throughout. That's how we also try and keep the star as symmetrical as possible. And then I need to move it around so I can get my pliers right after the point or after the bend that we just made. Straighten that out a bit, sharpen up the point. And you can always, this is what I mean as well, as you're making it, if you need to, if you feel like anything is a little bit not quite symmetrical or doesn't look like it's going to end up being quite right, you can always adjust any points or any bends along the way, making your way obviously up towards that initial bend that we made, because that's where we're heading to get the final star. So then to get this point here, we just push the wire against the pliers again. You can slowly see it start to come together now. And try and make sure you get the points as even in size as possible. If you need to tighten any up a little bit. And you can always swap that bend that's just made this point here, swap from one side to the other, just to sharpen it up and just give it a little squeeze. Something like that. I think I just need to tighten up this one a little bit. And when I do that, I just need to straighten out those two wires that are next to each other there, or across from each other. Just bring that up a little bit. Now to make the point here, bring that back out. And obviously I can see that that point will kind of conflict a bit with that, so I'm just going to take the initial bend and just open it back up a little bit. A bit like that. Bring it around to sharpen up this one. And then this is the one that needs to be straight with the one running just above my finger there. Those two need to be somewhat straight. So running in the same line as each other. And then grab on, take the wire back around, push against the pliers. And this is the final full point that we're making, because the first point there we made the first half of it, but we obviously need to complete that as well. Just sharpen this one up. And then this is where we're then gonna, when we make the next bend, that's technically gonna complete the star. So any final little adjustments you need to make, you can kind of tell now how it's going to be and how symmetrical it's going to be. I'm going to grab onto the other side of the point there that we just made, and then bring this back out so it's in line, continuously like the other times, with the wire opposite, but also you can see that naturally it now completes the star. And that first point that we made technically with the very first bend, just push against, and also make sure to just squeeze this wire. Just need to flip it around. so we get a sharper point, or something a bit like that. So there you can see now we have a full star. So now that we have our first full star made, then obviously what we need to do is continue to the point where we can then start making the second one. So this is also really where you just need to decide how you want yours to be, and where I mentioned about holding it against your ear to make sure you get the shape right so it sits nicely. So what I'm going to do is, what we need to do first of all is follow the shape of the star we've already made. So it's fairly easy to do that because we already now know where to place the pliers. So like you can see, the wires are meeting at the top, so the final star is made, the full star, but we need to continue this. So I'm going to continue taking the same length, and I've placed my pliers on that last, right after the very last bend, as if I was going to continue the same way that I've done throughout, but obviously we already have the shape of the star in place. So I now know that I need to bend this wire, the length of the wire, against my pliers here, but I already know the angle, so we basically just need to follow the wire that's right underneath it. And then again, put your pliers on the other side of the bend. And then again, place it on there, and you can hold on to it, because then I'm going to take the length of wire and push outward against the pliers. And then go to the next point. Like I said, all I'm doing now is basically following the shape that we've already done. That's underneath, so this wire is now starting to overlap itself, but following the same shape. What you can always do if you feel like you need to is come from above and just adjust anything, just to make sure it looks nice as well from here, because obviously whatever wire is going to be the top one and be the visible one, you want that to look as nice as possible. So if you need to sharpen up any bends or any points, then still do that in the exact same way. You can either do that coming from below here, or just focus on that one wire by doing it from above, so you don't grab onto the other wire, because that way you have a bit more control with it. So like that, and then I'm going to grab onto there, follow the next point, just bring the wire out, move your way around. And like I said, it's up to you where you want your next star to start. It all depends on the shape that you're going for. I'm going to get down to this point down here. So technically, let's open that up a bit, the third point from that very top one, the first one that we started making. So that means I'm going to bring this out, going in that direction to the point of that third point, to the very tip of it, and then just have the wire come out like this for now. I'm just going to tighten up that bend again, like that. And then we just want to check that everything is nice still and it looks nice, and we have that heart shape, and we haven't kind of pushed anything out of shape that we don't want to. So from that point there is where I'm going to start the next star. So I'm just grabbing onto the wires inside that point I'm coming out from, both of them for now. Then I'm going to just bend this wire against the pliers, but not obviously fully around, to follow the shape still. I need this to kind of stand out from the first star, but still make sure we have enough space for the second star and not any other points that's going to be around it. So I'm just going to bend it so it comes a bit out in this direction here. And then we can start making the next star, and that's just in the exact same way. So that means I'm going to then go right after the bend we just made, and then we need to start making the shape of the next one. That means I'm going to push this away from myself, outward you could say, to make the first full point in the star. Again, make sure the angles between the points are not fully 90 degrees but a bit larger. Make sure to sharpen up the point, or the bend rather, and then place your wires, your pliers on the other side of that bend on the wire, and then make the first point by bending the wire against the pliers here in the opposite direction, and then sharpen it up by going on each side of it. And then when you're happy with that, bring the length of wire back out again And same principle, make sure right here, this first side and then now this tail are more or less level with each other, coming in the same direction there. So you can almost run a bridge across that point there and they would connect. So basically now what you do is make this star in the exact same way as the first one. Is the same principle, because obviously we have the starting point that's up here, that's coming from the point in the first star, but that was coming from the point that we made that bend from these curves, so it's the exact same principle. So you just make another star, and obviously once you've made the full star, you reach back to the top. It's then down to you to decide which point you need to reach to then start making the star after that. So it doesn't always have to be, say, the third one. It all depends in what direction you need your stars to go according to your ear, so what curve that you need it to take. So I now made the third star, and I just want to show you what it looks like. So you can see we have this little shape going on, kind of a curve starting with the stars. So just to show you, this is going to be sitting along the top part of the ear. So if I just bring that out, obviously the sizing is a bit off, but just to give you an idea, it's going to sit along the top part following the curve there. And then it looks like that. And then what I've just done is made the final star, making sure that the wire crosses over so you get that final point. I'm not going to finish off the wire just yet. I'm going to do both of them at the end and show you how to do that. But also what I just want to mention is when I'm making the stars, I make the shape, and then when I start following the shape again, I make sure to bring the tail over when I do that. So every time I meet up with itself and then follow, I bring it over and then make the next star and then bring it over to follow the shape, and then I go and make the final star. So obviously this is the one side. Then what you got to do now is just repeat the same on the other side, again making the shape that you want. So now I made the stars on the other side as well, and then this is what it looks like. You can see I have 3 on either side. You can make however many you want to, that's going to sit nicely on your ear and what your personal preference is. But then what I'm going to do is show you how to finish off the ends of the wire, because obviously we don't want any wire ideally sticking out and kind of scratching on the skin on the ear. So I'm just going to show you on one end, and what I'm going to do is first of all I've just put the tails just to make that final point so it's crossing over there. What I'm then actually going to do is just grab onto that wire right after the last bend, and then I'm going to just continue as if we were going on top and following the previous shape. So I'm just going to bring this around so it follows that first point, you could say, just coming around a bit like that. So it is actually now starting to cross over, but I'm not going to continue following the shape, because what I just wanted to do was make sure that the tail here, it goes in towards the wire that it's currently crossing over the top of. So what I'm going to do is take my flush cutters, and we need to cut off the excess, but where we need to cut it is right around where we have the bend, so more or less at the tip of that point. But we need to make sure that once we cut it off, the tail that's left, or the wire that's left, is going to end up going in towards and in against the wire that it's crossing over the top of. So just show you here. So basically you want to look at it and cut it off so it aligns with the wire that's running underneath it that it's crossing over the top of. And always rather cut off too little than too much, because you can always cut off a bit more, but obviously if you cut off too much to begin with, you can't add any more wire. Cut that off, and you can see there's just a slight little curve or bend in the very end, and then it meets up and makes that point still nicely. Then I'm going to take my flat nose pliers, and then obviously right now it's sticking out, you can feel it with your finger, so we need to make sure that this is going to be flattened out. So I'll bring it down, so if you can see from the side, I bring it in, so the end of the wire now is going to meet up with the side of the wire that's running along there. So basically if this is the end of the wire here, and this is the other side where the star is, it's going to meet up like that. And that's going to basically seal it in place nicely. And just make sure you run your finger over it and you can't feel it. If you can, just flatten it out a little bit more to make sure it's not actually sticking out. But then you still have the star shape in place and a complete one there. And obviously you just want to do the same thing on the other end. So once you cut off both ends, then what there's left to do is to shape these curves in place so they can actually capture around the ear, and obviously make sure it's not going to fall off. So what I'm going to use for that is these 6-step bell making pliers again. You can use round nose pliers, you can use a mandrel of any sort, it doesn't really matter. Just something so you can get that rounded shape. And I'm just going to do one side at a time, grab onto the edge of it at the end, and then start bringing it around gently. Obviously make sure to do it in the right direction and roll it in like that. So we end up with it sitting kind of like that. So you can see, imagine that's going to grab around the ear. You just do the same with the other one. Grab onto it and roll it inwards. It's also going to be nice and comfortable because there's no ends of wire sticking out anywhere where it sits on the ear either, because you just have these two curves kind of hugging around the edge of the ear. And then obviously it's also slightly adjustable anyway, so that's what it looks like now. So all you have to do is if you need to just readjust any final little things. But then you can see the way we made the stars is some places we have two wires laying on top of each other, but other places we just have the one. So that's just the nature of how we made it, but then it curves around and sits nice in the ear. So these are the ones that I've made. Obviously the copper one that I showed you, and then I also just made one in silver to show you how different it can look with the different color wire. So obviously it's personal preference what color and kind of wire that you choose to use, but then this is what it looks like, and you're going to have these cute stars running along the ear in this shape. So it's quite a simple technique to make them. You can see there. And if you like ear cuffs, I do have other designs that I have tutorials for. What I'm going to do is link a playlist for that. It might be interesting for you to watch. But otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one, and thank you very much for watching.